today we're going to talk about vaccination. Make sure you've got your phone on silent out of the way because this is really important. It's probably one of the greatest discoveries of the last 300 years in terms of extending people's lifespans and preventing unnecessary death. So we're going to start by looking at a graph here. I've got an axis that has the concentration of a certain antibody on the y-axis and time in days on the x-axis. Now if you remember from the video we just did previously on the immune response, your white blood cells do three things. They do phagocytosis, where they eat invading pathogens non-discriminately. They produce antitoxins, which neutralize the toxins produced by things like bacteria, and also they produce antibodies, which attack and target pathogens that invade your body. And we talked about this concept of memory or immunological memory, and this is incredibly important. But before that happens, let's just consider a common cold. Yeah, so a common cold, nothing too deadly or anything at the moment. Let's consider the story, because you probably get infected by a common cold every year. Seasonal colds come round, they're viruses, they have high mutation rates, so they're different each year, so you could get maybe 1 or 2 colds in a year quite easily, and it's a good way of explaining what happens in your body. So let's imagine that you get coughed or sneezed on day 0. So at day 0, this is when you become infected. Okay, you become infected with the virus at day 0. Now if we look at the antibodies that are related to that cold, that specific seasonal cold, then at the beginning there's going to be no antibodies. So we're right down here in this corner. Now the virus is going to be in small numbers at the beginning. It's going to go into the cells by fusing with the cell membrane. It's going to inject its DNA into the nucleus, and the nucleus is going to copy its DNA, or its RNA as it's called sometimes, and make new virus particles. And then those virus particles are going to be assembled in the cytoplasm before finally exploding out of the cell and infecting all the cells around them. Now this process takes time, and the virus levels will build up, and eventually the body's immune system will start to pay attention. But for say the first 5 days, you don't even really know you're ill. This is called the incubation period. Okay, the time where you have the infection, but you don't really know you have the infection. And then what starts to happen is, as your body becomes aware of the infection, your white blood cells start to produce antibodies. This antibody concentration will start to go up and up and up, and it will reach a peak. And then as the virus is destroyed by your immune system, then it will start to come down. But really importantly, it will come down very slowly, like this, and come to a base level that is not 0. So we've got the infection, we've got the time where we're not necessarily ill. As the antibodies ramp up, we start to feel ill, the inflammation that's occurred, and that gives us our runny nose and our cough and our mucus and everything. And then we start to feel better, but the antibodies remain in our system for a long period of time. Now, that's not really a problem with the cold, because colds are relatively non-lethal. You don't need to worry about catching a cold. You don't feel very good, but at the end of the day, it's not going to kill you. If we change this to a virus that has been a worldwide killer for many, many generations, measles, the problem is here, let me write that properly, that measles unfortunately has a mortality rate, measles, of 15%. So 15% of people that contract measles die. That's a very, very, very high percentage. Luckily, not that many people get measles at the moment. But this area here would be potentially deadly. Let's say you survive that though. Let's say you get lucky, or you'll just happen to be in the kind of majority of people that don't die from it. What would happen if you got infected there and then you got infected again with the same strain here? So this is our second time. Well, this is what's fascinating about the white blood cells. They have this memory function, and what's going to happen is we're going to get a rapid increase of incredibly large amounts of antibodies very, very quickly that would then start to decay away. So in our secondary infection, we have this huge response from the immune system. And this response is almost unnoticed by the body because it's so instantaneous. There's no lagging phase here, yeah, where we're not aware we're getting ill and the virus is building up into huge amounts, and then it's a real battle to fight it off. We have a really targeted, really specific, very effective secondary response. So our primary response is slower. We feel very ill. We're going to feel very ill here. And in our secondary response, we may have no symptoms at all. No symptoms. Okay, we will be completely unaware that we have been exposed to it. A good example of this in nature is chickenpox. Yeah, so most people have chickenpox as a child. They get a temperature, they get quite a few spots, they don't feel very well for a few days, but essentially they come through it harmless. And then any other time they meet a child with chickenpox, they don't get ill. And it's not because they don't get infected, they do get infected, but what happens is their memory cells that are hiding in their glands, you know, those things under your armpits and your spleen, they will kick into action straight away, produce those chickenpox or measles related antibodies and attack the virus straight away, destroying it. But that's not ideal, is it? Because again, you have to get ill the first time to develop that immunity, and often chickenpox is done when you're young and it's relatively inconsequential. You have a fever and you might get some scars if you pick the scabs. If you get chickenpox when you're old, it's actually quite painful. It's actually not very enjoyable at all. So luckily, a guy called Edward Jenner in the late 1700s came up with a better solution. Now, he is famous for inventing something that's called vaccination. And what we do in vaccination is, instead of waiting for you to get ill, here we give you a vaccine. And the vaccine is going to be either a dead pathogen, it's one that is not actually alive, but just has fragments of it, maybe some antigens that you can use, or maybe it is what we call an inactive strain. So in the case of a virus, it would still be the measles virus, but it will be a version of it that essentially doesn't make you ill, like a weak cousin of the actual measles virus would be a good way of thinking about it. And the way that is created and that changes over time as technologies develop. In the case of Edward Jenner, he was worried about smallpox, and so he inoculated, as it's called, his kids with cowpox, which is the cow version of smallpox that is not as deadly to cows or humans, but is similar enough to trigger an immune response. So what you get here is you get your jab, and then over days you build up your antibodies, just like a primary response, and then they go down again, but they don't go down to zero. They stay at this level. And this is brilliant because you don't actually get ill from this. You don't have the disease. You just have your body building an immune system. I mean, some people, you might get the odd side effect. People get babies when they've had their jabs. They sometimes run a temperature for a day or so as their kind of immune system kicks into gear. It causes that fever. But most importantly, they have a very low chance of death. Now, later on in their life, we actually get our first infection. Our first infection of measles come along. We, as a baby, had the MMR jab as an example, and that made us immune to measles, mumps, and rubella. So when this first infection of measles come in, and our immune system kicks into gear straight away and dies away over a long period of time, but most importantly, we have no symptoms here, and we have no symptoms here. So at either time, we're not at risk of dying, and that is generally considered a good thing. So vaccination is responsible for the destruction of huge numbers of possible pathogens that made mortality of people hundreds of years ago much higher than it is today. If it wasn't for vaccination, we would still have problems around the world with polio, with measles, and with other diseases like rubella, which can make teenage girls infertile for the rest of their life. So it's a very cheap and efficient way of priming your immune system, giving them an awareness of an infection before it comes along, so that when they see it, their secondary response can kick in and prevent a further infection.